Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for coming. Sort of some familiar faces and new faces, so that's great. So really, I mean, I'm just kind of hosting this in a way and facilitating it. I'm not an expert myself. I've picked up bits and pieces on the way. So really, I'm just hoping that we have some people who know an awful lot more about this field than I do. So we'll be tapping into their experience and advice, and also a bit of perhaps looking forward ahead to things. So, but I mean, I think the point is the idea of community energy, I think, is really taking off now. And again, some speakers will be able to really illustrate that. But, you know, it covers so many things now. It addresses obviously climate change, the fuel crisis, fuel cost crisis. It's also about engaging with the local economy, trying to retain more money within the local economy, job creation, community building. It does tick an awful lot of boxes, I think, about a more perhaps a regenerative sort of future. So we have we'll try and we'll keep this to about an hour and a half max, but certainly we'll see how it goes. I'm sure there'll be quite lots of questions, but what I'd like to do is to start really just have a few short presentations around the questions and the agenda we put in, and then we'll have a sort of Q&A afterwards there, because I'm sure certainly a lot of the people, the new people, will have lots of those. And if it's helpful, we could do a breakout, but otherwise I think depending on numbers, we can probably just do a straight hands up. So yeah, if everyone could keep on mute unless they actually want to speak. Again, I'm sure, hopefully everyone's familiar. If you put your hand up on the reactions spot down at the bottom there, raise your hand if you have a question or would like to make a point, that's great. So I think that's it. We've got Julian and Bill specifically from WCA, and we've also got some others and others. The speakers are from WCA too. But before I introduce them, I'd just like, maybe Bill, would you just like to say short words about what the Wiltshire Climate Alliance is about, because not everyone might be familiar.
Yeah, sure. Very quickly, because I've wasted your time. The WCA was formed in lockdown to try and start to address issues with the council about how to deal with climate change after they declared their climate emergency. And a lot of us got together in February 2020 and actually agreed that we should form a group. Groups got together to agree we should form a group. So we are a group of groups. We've now got 40 odd groups in WCA, and we've got about 500 members, and they are spread around both as individuals and as members of the group. But our first aim was to push the council to do more on climate change, which we believe has actually been quite successful, because then I've got a climate team of 10, and actually they're doing quite a lot. Whether they're doing enough that's a question, but things are happening. And so we've turned our eyes this year to looking at projects we might do to support communities in Wiltshire to look at various things. And this is one of those project groups. So what we'd like to try and do is work out from this meeting through Tony how Wiltshire Climate Alliance can help other communities who are not doing community energy, how we can help them to find out more about it, to support them in going forward in terms of knowing who to contact, etc. We aren't the experts, as Tony said. We have experts in our group, we aren't. So I'll just pass over back to Tony now, because I think that's where we are now, ready to go on that community energy journey.
Great, thanks, Bill. And just to say, the WCA also cover a lot of other areas around land use. We're looking at local plan and all those things, because as we all know, or are coming to see now, all of these issues are interlinked. Which is what I was emphasizing about the community energy. You know, it does many other things apart from address climate change, the cost of energy. So we have the speakers we have today, speaker experts. We have Peter Capener, who is with Bath and West Community Energy. We have Sophie Fernsley-Whittingstall, who is with SFW Communications. We have Nick Murry, who is the Zero Chippenham Community Energy Benefit Company and a county councillor. And apologies on the email sent out. We didn't quite spell you right. I'm sorry. I'm sure that's a familiar one for you, but apologies for that, Nick. No A in Murray. And we have actually Jeremy's not here. We were hoping to have Jeremy Wyatt, who is in fact setting up a community energy project in Great Bedwin. So he may well join us later on, hopefully. Anyway, we have a sort of agenda, but I'm very conscious that we kind of, a lot of the issues are very interlinked. But so I don't want to get, and I'm sure all the speakers will have their own angle on all those aspects there. So I think really the aim of today is to try and help people see how you might go and set up a community energy company. What are some of the issues around that that you have to be aware of from the start? So you don't invest a lot of time and energy and then find that things change. And then also to offer you a roadmap, if you like. How can you then move on from there to actually get something set up? Now, the more research, hello there. Could you go on mute, please? Thanks. Great, thank you. And yeah, no, thank you, Nigel. Welcome, by the way. So, and apologies for the delay. So where was I? I was saying, yes, the thing about community energy is there is a huge amount of information out there, and there's a lot of expertise and all sorts of organizations. And Peter Capener, I think is one of his other roles, is with the Wessex Community Energy. So he'll talk about that a bit later on. But there is, for those who want to start, you're not on your own. And certainly when you look at maps, there's multiplying numbers of energy companies all over the country, and they take many forms. So that's one of the things that we also want to give you an idea of, because it's not just one model that works. So, I mean, for instance, in Wiltshire, we have, and we have, nice to see Maggie's here from Nadder Valley. We have so projects in Nadder Valley, Salisbury, Chippenham. Wiltshire Wildlife themselves have a number of solar projects that engage with the community, and there's activity in Swindon. So there is stuff going on even in the county, as well as obviously beyond. So as I said earlier, I think really, you know, community energy plays an important role in driving local climate action and engagement. But as well as reducing carbon emissions, which, as Bill said, the county are committed to doing anyway. So we are, if you like, aiding their work as well as our own. It's also creating a secure local energy supply through decentralized electricity. And that's, I think, becoming more aware, perhaps, you know, with outages that are going on and the grid capacity is being challenged. That might become more important. I think we'll highlight that later. So we're protecting people from rising fuel costs. Obviously, that's big issue, perhaps receding a little bit now. But also one of the great benefits is that it generates some of the money coming out of the revenue from the company can actually be used for community benefit. And so you find actually there is funding for all sorts of community activities that arise out of these energy companies. And they can be all sorts of sizes. I mean, for instance, I think the biggest wind turbine in the country now is going to be built just in Avonmouth. I hope someone's going to nod if that's right. And that's actually been set up by a group called King's Weston, which is one of the poorer areas of Bristol, and is specifically there to generate income for local community use.
Lawrence Weston.
Yeah, sorry, Lawrence Weston.
Yeah.
So it can take many forms, and obviously can create jobs, and actually by bringing people together, so actually aids and creates community cohesion. Anyway, I think that's probably enough of me. If I could, I'm going to jump around a little bit between the speakers, if I may, just to pick up things. But perhaps the Peter, would you speak to what sort of forms of energy sources that communities are tapping into at the moment?
Sure. Yeah. So just to introduce Bath and West Community Energy, the organisation I work for, we do cover the west part of Wiltshire, so Corsham, Bradford and Avon, Trowbridge. And we're developing a number of projects in that area. You tend to find that the solar PV is the technology that most community energy groups start with, and usually rooftop solar. It's the easiest technology to get established, but and the least, particularly on the rooftop side, the one that has the least barriers in it to get it through to commissioning. But we also have, and as some of the other community energy groups that Tony mentioned in Wiltshire, a number of ground-mounted field arrays, solar arrays, that have a very strong biodiversity element to it, improving biodiversity. So there's a strong link between energy and nature recovery with solar PV as well. And they tend to range in varying scales. Up to quite large scale, we're working with Eden Renewables and Zero Chippenham, who's setting up North Wiltshire, Zero North Wiltshire, to part share a larger solar array. So that's a real opportunity for communities to take commercially developed projects into community ownership to secure this range of benefits that Tony was referring to earlier, the greater control, accountability, local involvement, and the local benefits that come from that. I think the other sorts of technologies that particularly interested in are wind turbines. Within Bath and North East Somerset, which we also cover, we have the benefit of a local plan that has areas of search for wind turbines, which effectively addresses national government's de facto planning ban on onshore wind. Wiltshire doesn't benefit from that at the moment. The council hasn't implemented that sort of policy. But the wind turbine that Tony referred to was established in Bristol without that sort of planning. So it is possible, but it's quite rare without that sort of planning policy to see wind turbines successful. But community ownership provides a real benefit for wind turbines, where we're trying to establish turbines that have a connection with their local community, to build consent and support for new technology. That ownership model works exceptionally well. And with all these technologies, what we're talking about is raising capital from local people and further afield to invest that capital in building the projects, and then being able to repay that investment with interest over time. And people become members of the co-ops, community benefit societies. We'll talk about the different types of models in a bit, I'm sure, Tony, but they're community organizations tend to be democratically controlled, one member, one vote, regardless of shareholding, which is an important element to really build in accountability and local ownership. So solar and wind tend to be the main technologies, but hydro is something that community energy groups have developed. We have one small hydro. They tend to be very, very long-term projects. Our project took 7 or 8 years to build, through lots of problems with Environment Agency approvals, planning, changes in design. It was a really problematic thing, and we probably wouldn't do another one in the near future. But hydro is certainly a possibility. Some people have had more success with it than we have. And then the other technologies that we might look at in terms of renewable electricity generation, a kind of larger scale. And there is a growing debate around the potential for community energy projects to buy into offshore wind and even tidal, which are looking at in Wales. So those are possibilities, but obviously the larger the scale the project, the more challenging it is for communities to raise sufficient capital to secure sufficient scale ownership. Then there's the whole area of heat, which is a lot more difficult to make a community model work. With renewable electricity, we can buy the assets, own the assets, maintain and operate the assets. And when electricity is generated, it gets exported to the grid. If it's linked to a building, gets used on site, but then gets exported to the grid, and we get paid for all the electricity that gets exported to the grid. With heat, it's a lot more difficult to make a business model stack up, because you are dependent on the heat demand within the building or buildings that you're supplying. And you can get into that perverse situation where you actually want people to use more heat in order to consume the kind of heat that's being generated by your renewable program. However, there are models that could work, looking at particularly district small scale heating networks, where from a community ownership perspective, you could look at owning the pipes, the distribution network, and charging the buildings a kind of standing charge for use of the pipes, a bit like you would with broadband or any other mechanism for getting services to buildings. And in that way, you break the link between actual level of demand and income. And that's a model that kind of works quite well with community long-term investment. You're talking about 50+ year investment in the pipework to generate that long-term successful model. But it is something that communities in different parts of the country are looking at. So heat is more difficult to work, but it is possible, particularly as heat pumps become more viable, costs fall, and you could look at heat pump supplied heat networks rather than relying on biomass, which introduces a whole range of other sustainability issues around where you get your feedstock from. Just a couple of other mentions on technology. Storage, I think, is a critical technology that we need to build into our electricity system network far more. That's storage either embedded behind the meter in buildings, or directly connected to the grid, or potentially co-located with solar PV on field arrays. And storage is critical in order to create greater level of flexibility within your supply of electricity, because the more and more solar that you generate onto the network, the more electricity that is being generated in the middle of the day. And given that peak demand tends to be first thing in the mornings and in the evenings, we increasingly get a mismatch between when we're generating electricity and when we're using it, which then has an impact on us as generators over time, because the price that you can sell your electricity for will begin to go down, basic supply and demand. If we're oversupplying generation at a particular time of day, that becomes a real problem for us as generators, as well as the grid and managing that generation. So battery storage is critical, and indeed looking at other forms of longer term, longer duration storage. The business models from a community perspective for making battery storage work are more challenging, because there is greater level of contract risk and volatility within the markets for battery storage than with straight generation. But I think increasingly that will become more possible as battery storage falls, and we are looking at several battery storage projects. One of the problems is that really from commercial viability, you need larger scale batteries than typically is an appropriate scale for community, or an achievable scale for community. But that's I think will be an increasing thing. And then looking at other technologies like EV charge points. We've, for example, done a feasibility study on EV charge points, and NADA, Community Energy, who are developing a great EV charge point program, looking at EV charging, so electric vehicle charging. So again, something that I think offers real potential from a community perspective. So that's all the technology side of things. There is a whole area around demand reduction, energy efficiency, retrofit, and demand flexibility, demand shifting, which if people are interested, I can refer to, but I've gone on for enough, I think, for the moment.
Thank you, Peter. That's really very helpful and comprehensive. So there's a lot there. Just to remind people, we have recorded this, so you can always come back to to glean all the snippets of information that Peter gave there. I'm just going to call on Sophie and then Nick, just to see, is there anything in your experience what you'd like to add just to that particular point about the types of community energy? I mean, we're going to go on to how you set up a company and also some of the issues that you might encounter, but was there anything you wanted to add? I mean, that's not necessarily, don't need, if there's anything you thought would help.
I thought that was a very comprehensive overview from Pete. A couple of statistics, I think. Studies have shown that if an energy asset is owned by the community, well, certainly a solar farm, the amount of money going back into that community is increased by about between 12 and 15 times. Have I got that number about right, Pete? It was quite an old study, but I think, you know, given the relatively small scale that most community energy groups can achieve, I think that is a really important thing to remember, because the more money is coming back into the community, the more you can do in terms of, you know, help other members of your community improve the energy efficiency of their homes, give them energy efficiency advice, that kind of thing, or, you know, installing solar panels on the local school or whatever. But I think that's the sort of, for me, I think that's the key benefit of community energy is keeping the surplus from the project in the local area and using it to deliver, you know, more benefits that at the end of the day are going to help to tackle climate change, because I think that's the principal, you know, the principal driver behind getting involved with community energy projects.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think that I really can't underline that more is, I think we'll go on to this, I'm sure, but setting up, you really need to look at what the demand is in the area, isn't it? What are you going to be, when are you going to be using the energy, and how much of it? Because then that gives you an idea of the sort of system in which perhaps is going to be most cost effective. Because yeah, if you whatever you don't use, then is you're not going to get the full financial benefit of it.
How do I get a bigger picture?
Nick, did you have anything to add?
Sorry, I think somebody's got their mic off, isn't it, Jonathan?
Sorry, yeah, you're a bit faint.
Yeah, I was just going to say, from my perspective, you know, and I'm new to it, in that I've only been sort of.
Could you? Sorry, Nick, you're a bit faint there. Could you?
Okay, I'll come near. It's the Wiltshire Council machine. It seems to turn the microphone down. I was going to say, I'm fairly new to it, and you know, having sort of started on the journey a few years ago. But I would just say, in relation to, you know, what you were saying about setting up community energy, I'd say it's probably better to support what you've got, because there's a huge fixed cost and a huge amount of effort involved, and a certain economy of scale in community energy. So, you know, we moved we set up in North Wiltshire because there was a bit of a gap, and we partnered with Bath and West in order to make it an efficient way of doing it. But I think that would be my advice to people, to look at what's already there and what's being offered, and buy into that. Or link up with, you know, neighbouring community energy, see if they're interested in expanding, rather than trying to start from scratch, which is really, really difficult. I would say that was my perspective. There are also other alternatives where you haven't got any local group, which is always best, because you get that local community energy fund and that local presence. But if that's not there and there's nobody else willing to move in there, you can always look at things like Big Solar COP, who have a national model that will help you look at particular projects in your area that sort of carry some of the cost burden and the training associated with that.
Yeah, good point. Yes, because if you're looking to support climate change and then or measures that address climate change, then yes, there are things around. You can buy into relatively local things. I think around Swindon, there's been a number of schemes set up by the what was it, Julian PPT?
PPS, Public Power,
PPS,
Swindon
Public
America.
Power Solutions. Yeah, there's a number of share offers that various organisations will offer, and yeah, I mean what you get out of them financially is that sort of varies, but it depends. It's being clear about what your expectations are and what your requirements are out of getting involved in this. Okay, well, thank you for that. So, okay, I think we've sort of covered a few options around models there, but perhaps we could sort of drill down into that a little bit more. I mean, I should imagine there's probably just a couple of models for community energy companies or benefit companies that are most used. Who would like to speak to that? Would that be Peter? Are you well placed to talk about just a few of the typical models? Yeah. Thank you.
I think it's really important to pick a model that fits the principles behind what you're trying to achieve. So things like the mutuals, the Community Benefit Society or the bona fide co-op, they have asset locks, which prevent commercial asset stripping, if you like, and they ensure that certainly the Community Benefit Society ensures that profits are not distributed to third parties, they're reinvested back into the community. So there are three main legal forms. There's the Community Benefit Society, the bona fide co-op, and the Community Interest Company. They all have different benefits, pros and cons. For me, the Community Benefit Society is the strongest because the principles behind it are set up for the benefit of the community. The bona fide co-op is similar in that both are cooperative structures. They're democratic, one member, one vote. Members are elected to the board and have a real say in the operation of the organisation. But the co-op is set up to the benefit of the members, and the Community Benefit Society is set up for the benefit of the community. And that's quite an important distinction. Going back to Tony's point about what are you trying to achieve? For me, the value of the community was community energy is around building consent and support, active support for action on climate. And so for me, it was better to create benefit that would go back to the whole community, not just the people that had sufficient funds to invest and become a member. So that's an important distinction. The Community Interest Company has value in that it's a standard company, can be limited by shares, limited by guarantee, that has a sort of community wrapper around it with some checks and balances. So it also has an asset lock, but it can distribute profits, albeit a limited amount of profits. So it has some benefits in that it's a little bit more straightforward to set up, marginally, more understandable in terms of it's a normal company, but it doesn't have the same community credentials perhaps as the Community Benefit Society. So those three legal forms are quite important because effectively it's the organization that will own the assets, and you need to be clear about what the protections are around the asset and the operation of the asset, who is accountable, who has control. So quite often, and this is quite important, I think that there's a lot of rhetoric employed by both private and public sector bodies around community energy. And people will talk about projects being community energy projects when perhaps they're not always community energy. A community energy project is when the community, for me anyway, a community energy project is when the community has control. It's not a commercial project that draws in public finance through a bond offer or a share offer, because those individuals that invest will have minority shares at best and limited, if no control over the operation of the assets. Certainly better than a straight commercial project that is owned by a venture capital trust in terms of local engagement. So it's not a bad thing, but it comes down to what is it that we're trying to achieve. So if what we're looking for is real community buy-in, consent, accountability, then having a legal form that actually owns the asset at the core of that is really important part of the model.
Thank you, Peter. Sophie, I know could you speak? I mean, there are, as Peter alluded to, I mean, there are other models where there is a commercial element, and that might come in maybe where there's not sufficient funds available locally to realize a project. Am I right in saying you're involved with one or two of those?
Yeah, well, I'm involved in the Forest Gate solar farm in Wiltshire, which both Nick and Pete as Zero North Wiltshire are going to be buying a 20% share from the developer Eden Renewables. So that's quite a good example, because that's a 50 megawatt solar farm, and we are seeing, generally speaking, solar farms getting bigger because of the cost of grid connections and so on, requiring economies of scale, and it's quite difficult for, not impossible. I know of several smaller standalone community solar projects that are under development, but it is harder than it was sort of back in 2015, 2016, when there was a subsidy supporting them. But because of the cost of grid now, and because of the lack of subsidy, projects have been getting larger, and a 50 megawatt project is probably beyond the scope of most community groups, not all, but most. So if you can partner up with a commercial developer and buy a share of the project, then that makes life easy, because the developer does the difficult business of developing the project and getting planning permission, which can be an expensive process in and of itself. And then the Community Benefit Society comes in either before or after construction, raises finance from its members usually by issuing a share offer, and probably borrowing some money as well from some sort of ethical lenders like Triodos and so on. And then they own that share of the project. They keep that share of the profits from the project, and that goes back into the community. It's a model which has been used a lot in Scotland with Scottish wind farms, and in fact the Scottish government makes it a condition now that new wind farm projects have to at least be open to the possibility of shared ownership with local community groups. Not all areas of Scotland have the community capacity to get involved with that, but the Scottish government has laid down very helpful rules on that, and it's now spreading a bit to England with solar, but it is there aren't all that many commercial developers who are that keen on getting involved with community groups. I think that in Cornwall now, the Cornwall Council is trying to do a similar thing to what the Scottish government has done, and make it compulsory for commercial developers to try to offer an element of community ownership in their projects. But yeah, that's it. So it's a good way for local communities to get involved in a renewable energy project that might be bigger than they could manage to finance and support on their own.
And I think that it's a really good summary. And just to add, though, going back to this, the notion of ownership, that one of the benefits of the way that Eden are looking at this is that they're open to the discussion about having a split site, so that as a community organisation, we actually own 20%. It's not that we have 20% shares, minority shares in a bigger company. There's actually a split where we own 100% of 20% of the site. So we would own with North Wilts, Zero North Wilts, that asset, and be able to influence the way the land is managed, maximize biodiversity, although Eden Renewables are very good on that anyway, but it therefore builds that accountability and greater connection between the project. And so I think, again, following through, what do we mean by ownership, I think is a really important part of this question.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting that then. Nick, as you're involved in that through Zero Chippenham, North Wilts, then is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, I could say a little bit about our story. Is the volume any better? I haven't found the audio.
Yes, it is. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we set up Zero Chippenham. We've been going in Chippenham for 20 years, but we set up formally as Zero Chippenham in 2018, and we had a solar rooftop PV scheme, a community scheme. But every time we approach schools and look to do some more, some sort of community energy activity, we seem to fail to achieve it, and we sort of not really getting very far. And also began to realise that there's a huge amount of time involved. I mean, I don't want to put people off, but this is why I was going back to my earlier point about, if there's something there, support it rather than try and reinvent the wheel. Because where the big opportunity came was when Eden, at the early stages of looking at Forest Gate, sort of said, well, there's a potential community angle to this, and that was probably 2018, 2019. So if it wasn't, it built up from there as an opportunity to get some sort of scale that then could allow us to run an organisation with some employed officers down the line, as Bath and West has, and actually make it sustainable rather than a bunch of sort of semi-amateurs putting their own time into it and maybe not getting that far. So that was a big break for us. Since then, we've added 2 other projects. Again, we're going to partner with Bath and West and do it as efficiently and effectively as possible rather than trying to sort of start cold. One of those is Sheldon, who we approached many years ago, and Bath and West finally managed to sort of break through with them, and we're going to sort of share in that with Bath and West. And the other one's a commercial scheme in Calne. So we have a portfolio of projects now, which we probably go out to share offer as a portfolio rather than an individual project, but it will depend on timing, which is a real mix of commercial, school, and a ground-mounted commercial scheme. So yeah, that's how we came about. We went for the BenCom model for the reasons Pete said. We paid the co-op to help us set that up. So they have off-the-shelf kind of services to help organisations set up from as little as £200 for using their template in setting up your BenCom rules, and then you can pay more depending on what kind of assistance you need. So we paid them for some help, and we're probably going to get some more help from them down the line as well. So there is help out there for organisations that want to establish themselves in that way. And we're formally registered with the FCA back end of last year, I think, or early this year. And we've had our inaugural board meeting earlier this year, and we're going to have monthly meetings from now on as these schemes get developed and we go out for share offer.
Thank you. That's really helpful, yeah, too. And just to briefly say your what areas do you extend to?
So geographically, we're just talking about North Wiltshire fairly loosely. So from where Bath and West works to the west, which should be about Corsham, onwards across the top part of the county. But it depends where the opportunities are. So at the moment, the schemes are located in Chippenham, halfway to Calne, and one in Calne. But it really will depend on, and partly, and also, Wiltshire Wildlife Trust Community Energy tends to operate in different parts of Wiltshire, so it's not completely territorial in the way that these things work out. But there was certainly a gap in North Wiltshire, and that's why we entered those discussions with Bath and West to see whether we could work with them to fill that gap.
Great, thank you. So I think the takeaway I'm getting from this is that it's perhaps it's a lot of work to set up from scratch, but there's a lot of help out there. There are organizations that can almost help you with that, do some of the heavy lifting, if you like, at the start there, and you still have an element of engagement and control at the end product. Perhaps we could talk later about, maybe what the actual financial benefits that arise from that. But I just want to move on. One thing actually be really useful to know where people are based, because certainly we've got some new faces there, and it would be good. I mean, we'll have a chance later on for the Q&A and things, but certainly if everyone knows how to do that, if you go onto your square image and the 3 dots there, you should have at the bottom a chance to rename. But that'd be really helpful just to know where people are based. Okay, so we've got some sort of feel there for the models of how
Tony, there may be a couple of other people in the group who've actually got some experience as well. I don't know if people want to offer general stuff.
Yeah, okay, sure. Well, I know we've got Nada Valley represented, haven't we? Is Mark? Yes, Maggie's there. Maggie, I mean, do you want to say just briefly about your experience, because you've been going for a little while now, haven't you?
Yeah, we've got Community Benefit Society set up, founded in 2015. Our chairman is here, Alan Marion Davis. Alan, are you available to come in on that? And also Richard Eccleston.
Yeah, do.
Great.
So maybe Alan, you can say a bit more.
Yeah, just maybe a bit about the model. Perhaps later we'll come on to setting up, but what model do you currently use? How do you invest? How did you get the money?
We have share offer, 2 share offers, one in 2015, one in 2018. First one was industrial and farm buildings. Second one was schools, with the help of Share Energy, which is very helpful in helping to get that off the ground. Alan, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I can. Yes, sorry, there's a bit of piano playing in the background, so I won't stay on mic for very long. But yes, it was both of them, of course, in 2015 and 2018. The 2015 one was the portfolio of rooftop solars were on farm buildings and commercial buildings. The 2018 one was on schools mostly. Both of them, of course, benefited from the feed-in tariff. So that made that business model work really well. It was a pretty well cast iron guarantee for people, 20-year investment with the capital gradually returned to them in tranches, plus, of course, the 5% interest. This third offer that we're contemplating now is on 6 schools in North Dorset. And of course, we don't have the feed-in tariff anymore. So the business model is not so risk-free, as it were. But we're going for a fairly conservative, safe estimates in terms of the business model. And we're relying really on usage of electricity, so getting a portion of the margin on the use of electricity being, as it were, purchased by the building, but also the export tariff as well. And we're relying on those 2 sources of income to maintain the business model. So fingers crossed on that one. We're hoping that will come out in the autumn, and we'll actually put up the panels on the schools next spring probably. But that's where we are with that.
Great, thanks. So yeah, you've obviously got some experience there. And just for those who don't know what feed-in tariff was, I mean, they are no more, unfortunately, but they were basically a government subsidy that really kick-started the whole proliferation of photovoltaic panels, particularly across the country. It was so successful, I had to scale it back quite quickly because suddenly everyone realized it was a great deal, especially farmers, strangely. Anyway, was there anyone else who wanted just to add a little bit on the models they use? Otherwise, we'll move on, because I'm just conscious.
Yeah, just very quickly, I think the point that Alan was just making about rooftop solar is really important, that there is a viable model selling electricity to the building owner, and it does stack up, it does work. We don't need subsidy to make that work, particularly at the moment with energy prices so high. Our model kind of has a cap where we don't charge the building owner ever more than 20p, and then if energy prices fall below that, they then still get a discount on what they're normally paid to their main supplier. So there's lots of value in there for the building owner, and it really does work. So it is the easiest way for communities to get going if you've got a big roof, particularly one that has a relatively large energy consumption. Really important that you maximize the on-site use.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking farms are great. So around here in North Wiltshire, we've got dairy farms, and they've got big roofs, and they've got constant use of electricity for the milk processing. So yeah, something to bear in mind. Okay, so I think we've got a sort of flavour there. Now,
Dave's got his hand up.
Oh, Dave. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I was just going to ask Peter, while you're talking about those rooftop arrays of panels on likes of school buildings, and are those now associated with battery storage to make the model work, or
no?
Or how do you make the generation income effective?
Yeah.
So does it assume on-site use, or do you take the energy and trade it yourself?
Yeah, we try and design the system so that you get at least 80% on-site use. So that does in some cases mean that you don't use the whole roof, but that's why you need large, particularly focus on buildings that consume a large amount of electricity. Schools do work, even though obviously there's issues around weekends and holiday time, particularly during the summer. So you tend to look at the larger schools, secondary schools, or larger primaries. So firstly, you sell electricity to the building owner at a discount to what they normally pay. Secondly, you then export the electricity that's left over to the grid, and we've got an aggregated power purchase agreement where we have a supplier that buys that spill from a number of sites. We've installed around about 1.2 megawatts across 10 schools and community buildings over the last year. We've got another 2 megawatts of schools and community buildings in the pipeline across another 15 or so buildings. So it is a model that works, and as Nada have been talking about as well, it's certainly something that it's a good starting point from if communities are starting from scratch.
Thanks, Pete.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, good question. So, okay, we've got here called bumps in the road. So I think already we've, various folks have identified issues that could challenge a scheme, or perhaps even stop it in its tracks. So it'd be helpful just to perhaps amplify some of those, just so people are aware of what may be lying ahead, as it were. I mean, for instance, I've noticed our local MP, James Gray, has only just this week he spoke last week at the environment debate about solar installations in Parliament, and the fine agricultural land which they're gobbling up across England. Wiltshire is the second largest county for these ghastly carbuncles in our landscape, and we surely have done enough in our contribution to net zero, whatever that is, and hope that the solar caravan will now move on elsewhere. So I think one of the bumps in the road is almost inevitably going to be politics. And I think one of the great things about community energy is where you are really engaged, the community are actually directly benefit or engaged with the energy being produced. a lot of that opposition falls away. And I know there's a big debate at the moment about onshore wind turbines. The government's been sort of flip-flopping around that. But I think there's a sort, it seems, correct me if I'm wrong, but there seems to be a presumption if there is local support and it's unanimous, then that wind might be possible as a form of renewable on land. But apparently it only takes one person to object. So, you know, that's quite a tricky one. But again, if I'd invite our speakers to address that, I think picking up the key ones, because I'm sure having heard some previous speakers, there's a lot of fine detail in there, which I think at this stage might not be helpful. But so perhaps just the big issues we need to be aware of will be really helpful. So Peter, would you mind kicking off with that one again?
So big issues, clearly planning and linked to that, community consent and support. And we shouldn't underestimate that. Whilst generally solar has less opposition than wind, particularly at a large scale, there is likely to be opposition. Our experience suggests that when they are community-led or community-owned, that some of that opposition falls away, and we tend to get more support, but there will still be some opposition. I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding or misapprehension or myths about land use. And going back to your point, Tony, about the politics, I'd be interested to know how much land is actually under solar in Wiltshire, but nationally, to get all of the kind of targets, carbon targets through solar that we need, we're talking about less than 0.5% of the land area, which amounts to less than 50% of the land that is currently laid down to golf courses. So it kind of gives you a sense of perspective. That's not to say that there isn't an issue around land use. There is. We clearly need to be sensitive to not utilizing high-grade agricultural land. We need to be sensitive around how projects are sited, both large-scale solar and wind, to minimize visual impact, to minimize environmental impact, to minimize the impact on birds and the like for turbines. But there's a lot of knowledge now how to integrate some of these technologies into the landscape in a better way that maximizes biodiversity, nature recovery, and minimizes impact. So I think the value of the community element is that we can enter into dialogue with local people around these issues and hopefully provide more substantive information. But planning is a big issue. And just on your wind point, this is the point I was making earlier, we still do have a de facto ban on onshore wind. The government were consulting on it, but the consultation recommendation that came out of it resulted in very little change in the national planning guidelines and to how they defined community support. So it really does need action from the local authority to create local planning policy that is more supportive, or at least opens the door to the potential for planning success for wind. So planning, big issue, community consent, grid is the other major bump in the road. Nationally, we have massive grid capacity constraints. Our electricity grid is not fit for purpose. To get to net zero, to decarbonize our electricity system, we have to shift from large scale power generation to decentralized generation that requires the grid to manage electricity flows both directions. That's a big challenge for the grid, and it's not up to it at the moment. So the more that we can mitigate that through flexibility of generation and demand, the better. But it will ultimately need two things. One is investment in the grid at a national level, preferably socialized, so that it doesn't go onto the bills of individuals where it'd be quite a regressive thing. but also there is gigawatts, which is a lot of electricity capacity in the system that has been allocated to developers, commercial, large-scale developers, that is not being used. It's the kind of equivalent of land banking, if you like. And finally, the transmission network and distribution network operators are realizing this, and they're looking to push a lot of the capacity out of the grid queue, which has currently been blocking the grid queue. And we need to do that in order to free up capacity for small scale generation at a local level. So planning, community consent, and grid are the big bumps in the road that hit us. The final thing I'd say is just around, and we're talking about buildings, we need to get the support of building owners to put solar PV on their roof. That's not always straightforward. It's fine. It's easier with schools and public sector buildings that can see longevity. When we start talking to businesses, it's a little bit more challenging because they don't tend to like entering into 20-year agreements, which is what you need to put solar panels on your roof and to buy the electricity. Increasingly, we're getting some more interest from businesses, but it is more challenging. So I think that's the other big area to crack in raising the profile of the importance of community solar and community projects to get more businesses, more building owners buying into that community model.
Great, thank you, Peter. Yeah. Well, it's good to hear that the grid capacity is being addressed, or at least being eased, because there are parts of the country where you just cannot do things.
We were given a grid offer for a project, but told that we wouldn't be able to connect until 2036, which is kind of crazy, isn't it? I mean, we're looking at decarbonising our electricity grid by 2030 or 2035, depending on who you look to, and we're not being allowed to connect until beyond that time at the moment. It's just not working.
Sophie, from your sort of angle, you've dealt with, as I said, slightly more perhaps commercial projects there. And are there any sort of additional road bumps in the road that you've identified in your experience that it will be useful to know about?
Well, I think that the planning issues are the same for commercial and community schemes. It helps if there is community support, but actually it's not a material. If you're offering shared ownership, it's not considered a material consideration in planning terms. And at the Forest Gate, the Wiltshire councillor who was responsible for that project just didn't buy into the shared ownership angle at all, and wasn't particularly interested in the benefits that it was going to bring to his community. I think the point about wind is an important one, because for people who don't understand how restrictive the planning policy is for wind, it's harder to get planning permission for one wind turbine anywhere in England than it is for any other form of development. So, for a housing development, for a new supermarket, for new commercial developments, they all have the same level of requirement for planning. They don't have this requirement to demonstrate community support that wind does. But yeah, no, but I think there's no great difference really from the commercial and the community side. Of course, if you do have a community that's involved, then that helps with getting support for your project while it's going through planning. But we know that planning authorities are capable of disregarding that as well on a whim. And I think the point, I think Pete asked how much solar there is in Wiltshire. I think it's about 0.4% of land in Wiltshire. So it's quite close to it's probably a bit above what the national average is, and quite close to what we'd need across the rest of the country to meet our 70 gigawatts by 2035. But I think it's also worth noting there are some really, really monster solar farms going through planning at the moment. And there's one just outside Oxford, which is 850 megawatts. And I think, doing a very rough sum in my head, that's about twice that's one solar farm that is about twice the size of all the solar farms in Wiltshire. So I think that's something that people need to understand too, to get a sense of perspective, particularly Mr. Gray.
Wow. Yes.
Apparently, Sophie, Wiltshire has the most solar panels in a county in England.
It's second largest capacity. Yeah,
Yeah.
second largest capacity. I think Cornwall is probably higher.
And I think, if I'm right in saying, that's partly because in areas like here where the it's effectively pasture land, deemed low grade agricultural land is more susceptible. More possible to put in those. You know, you wouldn't put it on a sort of up on the Marlborough Downs or something where you've got big arable fields. It tending to happen in sort of lower grade agricultural land. Yeah,
we're most of Wiltshire is grade 3 land, and you're supposed to avoid best and most versatile, which is 3A, 2 and 1. But Wiltshire, I think, is about 60% grade 3, but then you have to do studies to find out if it's 3A or 3B. But also the big restriction on where you can put any form of large renewable development is if it's an area of outstanding natural beauty. And I think Wiltshire is only about, I think, 40% AONB, whereas some counties like Devon and so on have larger areas, so that makes it harder to find spaces where projects can go.
Thank you. Nick, was there anything you bumps in the road? Maybe go on to Maggie and Nada. You know, what big obstacles have you encountered in your work?
Yeah, so I think we're gonna all be fairly similar in terms of what the big ones are. And I mean, I was in a meeting in London with National Grid and Ofgem, and you know, they were explaining how they're changing from an organisation. National Grid's changing from an organisation that was there to minimise the price to the consumer and make sure, you know, any development pays to make that happen, to one that has now got to develop a decentralized grid, a completely different agenda, and they're just not geared up for it. And you know, they are changing, as Pete says, so they're changing to district system operators at the local level, and there is the thing about you know, the queues is changing. They're also going to do more prediction in terms of where extra capacity should go on that will be funded nationally rather than requiring the developer to fund it. So there's change afoot, but I think there's a huge task ahead there. Local area energy plans are another big thing which I'm involved with in my work capacity, where the DSOs have got people coming in now to talk to the local authorities and the developers and try to work out how they're going to decentralise the grid. You know, it's not a centrally planning type of activity because it depends on the market, where land's available and what developers are prepared to invest in, etc. But at least they want to get a steer from where local authorities are thinking about putting in capacity from their point of view, and where the developers are interested in trying to join the whole thing up a bit. So that's the big challenge, big high level challenge that we're all facing. Planning is always a challenge. I mean, the local plan that's going to come through now, I haven't seen its net zero policy yet. I've been away and come back, but if it's going the whole hog like the Chippenham neighbourhood plan has done, and it's requiring net zero on site, that's going to force a lot more solar and or other, well, mainly solar and heat on site and that should make a big difference. But they could be more supportive, like Cornwall, of community energy. I don't think Wiltshire, I haven't seen any detail on this yet, maybe Pete can correct me, but I don't think Wiltshire is doing anything that's making it you know, sort of I mean, they're not going to be able to make it a planning condition or you know, usurp the NPPF, but they could certainly be supportive of community energy in the way they make decisions. So neighbourhood plannings are probably an area, if people you know, want to get in without getting into setting up community energy groups per se, want to support, if you can get a good supportive neighbourhood plan on this. You can even look at areas that are suitable and, you know, do an exercise like that. We worked with CSE on that. And then sort of more detailed bumps in the road is all about viability, I guess. And because, you know, the spill, I don't know if everybody's clear, but the electricity they're exporting back to the grid, I think, Pete, generally you're going to get 5p4 from most companies, aren't you? It's not.
No, get more than that. It can get 10.
Get as much as 10.
Yeah, 10p. We've just been quoted 11p.
Okay.
But yeah, it does range. You get more value if you can group projects together and sell that that export from across a number of rooftop schemes. So.
Yeah. So and then there's the issue with buildings and as Pete alluded to, ownership. So landlords not cooperating with the tenants, or the tenants not all wanting to come in, and there's a lot of variable tariffs. I mean, we were looking at a building where I worked where some tenants are paying 14p still, and some are paying 65p. And so the viability of putting solar on and offering them 25p or something doesn't work for the ones on those low tariffs still. It's incredible that they still are, but you have to sort of make it a viable proposition within the building in which you're working to be able to make the scheme work. So there's a lot of detailed bumps in the road as well that you've got to overcome.
Right. Thank you, Nick. Thanks.
Can I just comment on the visual impact issue? Kind of just come up in the chat. I think it's a really important issue to kind of address head on. I think given the level of energy demand that we have as a society, there is no way that we can generate enough electricity to meet that demand without having an environmental impact of some kind or other. It's just impossible. And I think we collectively have to acknowledge that and recognize that. It's then a question of identifying what environmental impacts are we happy to live with, that we feel we can live with. And that's where it comes down to the balance between kind of looking at climate, looking at visual impact, local versus global. And it's a really challenging issue. And I don't think we should minimize the impact that a wind turbine might have on a local community that is used to looking at views that are kind of well loved, and suddenly you've got a wind turbine there. So I don't think we should push aside those thoughts and those views. I just think we need to engage people in an honest way, but in a way that tries to place what we're doing in perspective, in that wider context of how do we want to continue, if we want to continue this level of standard of living with electricity that's giving us all the benefits of electricity. How do we want that? Where do we want that come from? Are we prepared to accept short-term, limited visual impact to continue to get those benefits? Because the current way of doing it is not going to be a long-term solution. And we've found that trying to build that sort of dialogue does bring benefits in terms of increasing support. It won't address everybody. There will always be opposition from some, but it does begin to break some of that down a bit.
Thank you, Peter. That's a really great point. And I mean, we do have to look ahead and think what are we prepared to do. Of course, the other way is we actually consume a lot less.
Well, we should
there's no magic bullet. There's no silver bullet out there that is going to solve this electricity renewables issue in any time soon. So yeah.
No, I kind of missed the whole energy efficiency retrofit demand reduction bit at the beginning when we were talking about technology. There is a role for communities in that as well. But there is landscape character assessment. There are kind of things that we can do that will help siting to minimize impacts. So anyway, I think Dave wanted to.
Yeah, I was just going to, Dave, before you're in the queue. I'm just thinking maybe we've had a huge amount of information here now, really helpful stuff. I hope you all agree. I just want to then throw the session open now, taps to questions that people may have, about either technical issues or general issues or whatever. So can we kick off with Dave?
Thanks. I just wanted to pick up on the visual impact of ground-based solar, and you talked about economies of scale, so that implies bigger arrays, bigger areas. And a number of people have mentioned in the chat about the benefits of ground-based solar farms as being very good for biodiversity, which is obviously a plus side. But how does that what can you how would you characterize that biodiversity? Are we talking about situating panels in meadows, or can we disguise or shield or these areas a little bit more with higher, hedgerows and trees, or does that impact the performance of the solar arrays?
I can answer that one. Yeah. It's both of those things. So with you'll plant hedges to screen views from key viewpoints, and then you'll also make sure that the land underneath the solar panels is sown with wildflowers and diverse native grasses and so on. Often you'll use sheep to keep the grass down, and there's now a requirement in planning that all new developments should deliver a biodiversity net gain of at least 10%. And there's a metric that you can use to measure biodiversity gain on any project, but on a solar farm in particular. And solar farms actually typically deliver biodiversity net gains of 50-75%, particularly if they've been developed on land that was previously quite intensively farmed. So yeah, it's measurable, and it does deliver both for screening and for biodiversity. And I see them, solar farm here where I live in Cairn. It's quite an old one. It wasn't developed with biodiversity in mind, but it's a very popular hunting spot for red kites. So there's obviously something living there.
Yeah,
I think it's a really important message if we're taking it back into our communities to understand that better.
Yeah, one of our solar farms, and I think economies of scale are important, but we can make, as community projects, smaller ground-mounted arrays stack up under 5 megawatts. We're developing one of a couple of megawatts, and one of our other ones, we've just did an ecological survey. It's been operating since 2015, and you can see a 55% increase in biodiversity through wildflower meadows, new habitats, hedgerows, and the like. So it is a real tangible thing, as Sophie says.
So typically, what 5 megawatts? What sort of area does that?
It's between 8 to 10 acres, depends on the kind of arrangement. It can be less, depending on the design of the solar array.
Thanks.
Thanks, Dave. Good question. Bill, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, a couple of things. I guess starting from at the beginning of all of this, are there guides? Is there a sort of standard you can process through so that it helps you build a community team that actually can work through this whole process? Because obviously you can't do it on your own, and you guys have done this in the community. But is there something that says step 1 to step 20? This is just so you get a start to get a feel for the things you have to do, and the people you have to engage with, and a sort of flow chart that says go here and go there and do all of this. So I'm just trying to get. There's a lot of stuff you're throwing at us today, and I'm just really interested in how I could take that away and process it in our community and try and get something going. But is there something already? There probably are 20 books I should be reading, but you've got the skill set already, and I just wonder whether there are some simple, if these are the basic steps you go through, rather than go through a whole 200 pages of this is how you do community energy. That was question 1. And add to that, what sort of size of team would you see that if you were developing a medium-sized solar array, for example, or something like that in the community? What sort of community team do you need? And then, but also a couple of things. Are there any examples of where you're actually discounting the electricity costs to the community as a general giveaway to say, look, this is your community facility, and therefore you're getting your energy X pence cheaper than you would, although you're exporting it out, you can give a discount to the local community. Are there any examples like that? Which I see drawing people in with money is the best way to deal with things in a community. You can offer them some money, they'll actually sign here. But if you're saying, well, it all goes into this part and we sold shares and you want to buy some shares, you'll get some money. A lot of people don't want to buy shares, they just want a discount on their electricity bill. So is there any examples of that? So the two ones.
You want to pick that up?
Well, I can answer it a bit on the discount on their electricity bill, which doesn't really work with solar in the UK because of the numbers. But in Scotland, I'm doing a project there where the community will get about 200 quid off their electricity bill, but it's a wind farm and it's a sparsely populated area. But and then there's also issues with the local energy bill that's going through, which I'm not quite up to speed with, which is supposed to change the rules so that you can sell directly to local communities, but that's not possible at the moment. But Pete probably knows more about that than I.
No, interesting. There's the Scottish example. I mean, just on the first thing about models, there isn't a how to do it guide. There should be, and there's enough knowledge within the community energy sector to produce one. And I'm deputy chair of Community Energy England, and it's something that we are, as an association, so Association of Community Energy Groups, we're kind of looking at. There are organisations that will provide help. Somebody mentioned Share Energy earlier, that very good organisation, and existing community energy groups like ours supporting Zero North Wilts is another model that can work. There are also through Co-ops UK, there's a network of co-op support advisors that can provide guidance. There's a community shares handbook that's on the Co-ops UK website. So if you're looking at developing a community share offer, then that's a really good resource that you can draw on, that has lots of really valuable information about do's and don'ts. So there are sources of expertise and resources out there, but the kind of the specific how do you do it, step 1 to 20, would be a brilliant thing to produce. I think in terms of the team, I think somebody mentioned at the beginning about expectations and plans. I always recommend to communities that are looking at this, try and get a sense of what it is that you're wanting to achieve first. Because from our point of view, what we've seen multiple times is community energy groups starting up with a vague sense of what they want to do, maybe doing 1 or 2 solar panels on village halls, and then losing kind of enthusiasm because people are voluntary and they've got lives and there's lots of other things that they need to be doing. And I think we should, as community energy groups, trying to be building a longer term process whereby we're creating enough scale to be able to start employing people, and therefore building a degree of consistency and continuity within the work that we do, which means building scale. So I think one of the first things that community energy groups or communities that are thinking about setting up a community energy organization should do is think about business planning. What sort of scale of renewables do you think you could get in your area? Talk to people about what could that mean in terms of income? What kind of scale do we need to get to before we can start employing somebody on a part-time basis? So it's not all down to a group of voluntary directors who are trying to do quite a lot of responsible stuff in their part-time and then getting frustrated and then going away and everything falling apart. So I think that is the starting point. How can we get to a scale where we can start to build real kind of capacity within the community infrastructure? That therefore means that when you look around the table at the people who are talking about this sort of thing, again, another question to ask is, are they the right people? Because they're often, when you start any new community initiative, the people who first come together are not always the people that you need. And there needs a degree of honesty about thinking, are these the right people? Do we need somebody who's got specific skills around finance or commercial or renewable energy? There usually is those skills in the community at some place. Is it possible to draw them into the discussion? And so getting the team and getting the strategy, I think, are the kind of starting points. And then it becomes a lot easier to draw in the expertise in order to do it. And then just finally on the local energy supply, unfortunately, the energy bill, the clauses within it have been stripped out by the government. These were clauses within the energy bill that would require energy suppliers to buy electricity from local renewables and set up a local tariff that would then force sell electricity back to local people from those local projects. This government doesn't believe in that. We're probably going to need a change of government for that to come through. However, there is a process going on that is trying to get a thing called virtual net metering established within the electricity system regulations. And there's a working group that is over the next year and a half is trying to make that work, which would be the ideal. And then you would have virtual net metering is where you have a virtual meter within the community, and everything behind that meter, all the houses, the businesses and the generators can then sell electricity to each other without exporting to the grid, and having, therefore you can minimize network charges. And then you can get to the point that people have mentioned is actually sell the electricity for less. The clauses in the energy bill didn't allow for that. You would have ended up with tariffs that were higher than what you currently pay, and therefore you're not getting the value of the renewables. We should be able to sell renewable energy to local consumers at a lower price because it costs less to generate than fossil fuels. And we need to see that benefit locally, because as other people have said, if we can sell local electricity to local people at less price, we're going to get far more buy-in. And hopefully, either through the regulatory change or when we get a new government, hopefully when we get a new government, if we get a new government, then we might see some change around that. Sorry, I didn't mean to be political.
Can I just add
Thank you, Peter.
Just add to what Pete said, because I completely agree with all that. But it goes back a bit to my point when Pete's talking about, going in there with a strategy and thinking about the skills you need and the scale. And, just to say again, for North Wiltshire, if there are people who are interested, we've got 7 directors on the board now. We are looking for a treasurer in particular with those skills, but we're looking for other people to get involved and generally to become members. And you can get stuck in, with your existing groups. You don't need to reinvent a group in the area when there's one already there. I know I keep banging that drum, but it's too true, because you do need that element of scale and skill and momentum in the first place.
Thank you, Nick. I know Julian's had his hand up, but I'm just wondering whether, Maggie, with your hand up, whether you could perhaps say just a little briefly about when you set up, how you're finding the skill sets and the processes.
I'm a director, so I'm a board member. I don't have any skills in solar or anything like that, any technical ability, but the board has changed over the time. I mean, in the last 6 or 7 years, we now, I think, are quite low. We only have 5 people on our board. We used to have about 9. People come and go for various reasons. But we do manage to employ part-time one project manager who managed the install of the last set up solar. And we also employ part-time Richard, who's here on this call, who is our technical manager, who kind of oversees what we've already done, which is great. And we've got those 2 people, but we can manage to do that out of our income. But we are looking again for more board members with specific skills, and it always happens. It kind of changes over time. But Bill, I can, sometime have a chat with you about more nitty gritty about how it's set up. It doesn't take too much, really. You just need enthusiasm and commitment and people who know a bit more than you do. But ours was mostly done with love and commitment and enthusiasm to be with a bit of grant money for setting up, which we were lucky to get. That's all gone now, but you know, we just survive on keeping each other going as much as we can, really. Okay.
Thanks, Maggie. And I think just to say there is bits of grant money out there to assist, I think, groups. So, you know, particularly if you are thinking of perhaps having to set up some monitoring or whatever. But I'm just conscious of time, so I'd like to wrap up if we could say maybe within 10 minutes, if that's possible. But so Julian, you've got a question now.
Yeah, it was a quickie, and obviously don't take more than you want. And if there's anything else you want to do before the end of the meeting, don't say so. But just a couple of quick questions really for people. One other sort of thing is shared ground source heat pump infrastructure, and I'm just wondering if anyone's aware of anyone starting to pioneer that. Also, if people are aware of the best sort of models which have produced significant amounts of insulation and retrofit, you know, as part of community energy schemes. I know it mentioned sort of some of the funding coming from the commercial shares, possibly going that way, I think. But yeah, those are my couple of questions.
Sorry, I can respond to those. I'm sorry, I'm kind of talking a lot. I apologise.
It's all good information there, Peter.
Thanks.
Kenza Engineering would be a really good source of information about ground source heat loops. They have pioneered this model of financing for heat networks and then installing the ground source heat loop as the heat source. They're doing some really good work around that. So they'd be a good source of information. And then, sorry, what was the other one? Sorry, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. Any successful projects that have produced insulation retrofit?
Yes. People powered retrofit, part of Carbon Co-op in Manchester, a community initiative that have pioneered the kind of retrofit, supporting the retrofit journey for households. Other organisations that are also doing it, community organisations, including Exeter Community Energy, Brighton and Hove, ESCO, South East London Community Energy, all running a mixture of home energy assessments, energy advice around fuel poverty, and in the case of people powered retrofit, I think called retrofit coordination. So not only do you provide an assessment of the home and provide a report saying this is what you can do, they then actually coordinate the process of retrofit and project manage it. So procure contractors, installers, and then ensure the works get done on time to quality so that the householder doesn't have to do any of that, which obviously is a critical issue around retrofit because it's such a complex, can be, particularly if you do quite intensive retrofit, quite a complex process.
Thank you. That's a really helpful answer. And of course, CSE is trying to do some, retrofit assessment type assistance.
Exactly.
Have you had any experience with them at all? And what's the situation with them?
Yeah. So we've just setting up a retrofit assessment program ourselves as Bath and West Community Energy that is working in partnership with Centre for Sustainable Energy, utilising their future-proof home energy assessment. We're also doing thermographic surveys, and we will also be doing the retrofit coordination. We're launching later on this year an Open Homes program. Open Homes is actually a really good idea for communities that are interested in doing things. Identify households in your area that have already done retrofit and work with those households to open the home for a weekend and get other people in the community to come around and have a look. Experience suggests that's a really brilliant way of motivating people to take action because they can directly talk to people who've already done it. When we did this a few years ago, I had about 75% of households that actually 700 people went round to see the homes, open homes. About 75% people then went on to take action themselves as a result. So I think there are some really good opportunities for community action on the whole retrofit agenda.
Can I just ask a question on that before going to the next one? Just quickly, how do the community groups deal with the cost of doing all of that and the expertise? Because obviously somebody's going to have to pay for that. Are there grants available to do that?
So we're kind of developing. We will be as these other organisations are developing a financially sustainable service over time. So you need enough scale. Targeting able to pay households, and you actually charge for that service. It's a paid for service. Our intention is to build enough scale that we can then subsidise some of that for lower income households as well. And we're also ultimately looking at the revenue that we're generating from our renewable energy projects, which we're now getting quite a lot of money from some of those projects with large PPA prices because wholesale prices have gone so high. We're looking to the extent to which we can subsidize some of those energy efficiency programs with the renewable energy. So, because ultimately, you're absolutely right. These services need to be able to pay for themselves, so we can recruit skilled and experienced staff to actually provide those assessments, which is what we've now done.
Great, thank you. And I think that really shows that when you start this action, it can expand out into other areas. Nick, I'm just very conscious of time. Nick, was there a particular question or comment you had there? You think?
I was just going to respond to Julian. So there's, I'll get him the link and we can put it on WCA website on the Green Homes Accelerator program that's looking at these ambient heat networks for rural areas where you're linking together ground source heat pumps and having a sort of efficiency and doing it as a community project. There's one in Chipping in Lancashire, but we can get that up and show people that. And I was going to say also, Warm and Safe Wiltshire, of course, is working on the insulation for the lower income households. I think there's a new bit of money available for Band D with poor EPCs at the moment, and they're doing a lot of the. But as Pete says, the difficult sector is the able to pay who just aren't doing it and who could afford to do it.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, well, I think we've had. I'm just looking at some of the faces on the screen. People have been very patiently listening there. I hope that's been helpful, and hopefully not too confusing. But at least you've got a taste of what's involved. It's a starting point, really. I think that's what we've been trying to offer here. So I'm just trying to think what would be, in terms of looking ahead, those of you who are new to this, what would you like to see happen? Because, I mean, WCA, we can help perhaps coordinate some of this. As I said, there's a lot of agencies and groups already out there doing stuff. So we could be a signpost for you if you were wanting to really take this further. Or if there was a real interest, we could perhaps even host another more specific event for people really wanting to drill down into how you start. So does anyone of the sort of starters there have any questions?
Yeah, I'd put my hand up. I don't know if I was next, but
I think.
Sorry.
I think. Sorry, I think I've got. Well, Andrew, I know you're in the group, but perhaps Ian. Could we go to Ian McQueen and wife, presumably?
My question is, I absolutely hear what was said about don't reinvent the wheel, join a group that's already active. What would be very helpful would be a map, an indication of what is covered by the schemes that are already working. Is there something that covers Market Lavington, or if not, are we near enough to get involved in a local one? That would be my question.
Okay. Nick, would you extend to Market Lavington?
I don't know. We could do certainly Wiltshire Wildlife Community Energy would cover that. But I think that would be a good exercise for WCA to actually have a bit of a directory of where the existing community energy groups are and what they're doing. That would be really useful. Yeah.
We've got some information around that, but yeah, I think we need to update that. So is everyone familiar with the WCA website? Because we've got quite a few resources on there. So if you just put in WCA, Wiltshire Climate Alliance, and there's various drop-down menus there for resources. So if you want to pursue that, otherwise you can contact us if you'd like perhaps a similar event or something like that, maybe. We could possibly offer that. But yeah, in the meantime, Andrew, was that
Okay, yes. I don't want to, it's been such a brilliant meeting, especially with the expertise of Peter, experience of Maggie, Nick, contributions. I really don't want to break that focus and the forward momentum. So I just want to flag up a couple of other alternative energy sources, perhaps as topics for some future meeting, as throwaways really. And one would be deep geothermal energy, which apparently exists under parts of Wiltshire, and another would be water source heat pump using our rivers and canals. Well, apparently a government agency has commissioned a study of the potential, but keep on keeping on. I'll just let those sit on the recording. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew, for that. That's yeah, I've come across some of those. Peter, could you bear with, and I'll just go on to John and Debbie, if that's all right.
Thank you. We've been listening. Debbie and I have been listening with just incredible interest. Really, I'd just like to echo a lot of things that have been said. But we are very much new to this ourselves. We know that something needs to be done in our village, so we're just looking for whatever advice we can get. We have noted that we are probably maybe in the area of Nick Murry, being in Hellavington, just north of Chippenham, we're kind of within the Chippenham area. So I don't know if it's worth getting together, having a chat just to see what the art of the feasible is. We'd be grateful for it just to be pointed in the right direction really at this stage, because we are, as I say, at an early stage, and we know as a community we need to do something, but we don't know what.
Well, we are confused and bewildered.
Yeah, no, I can definitely help you, and also I can sort of tell you what Zero Chippenham is doing on a wider basis, which some of which we've shared with other groups around the area. So I'll drop my email in the chat.
Okay, thank you. And just to mention, I am on the parish council here, so anything that I can learn from you, Nick, I'll be very happy to share with my colleagues here and see if we can get something going.
Right. Peter, did you want to add something?
I just had a suggestion. I'm conscious that we've been talking a lot. My experience is that if people have particular issues, we could potentially run a more practically orientated workshop where people came along with their specific questions, and we ran it as more of a kind of seminar tutorial sort of thing. So if people are thinking about setting up projects, we could actually deal with the questions that are in front of them, rather than people trying to remember everything that was being talked about at this session. That might be a suggestion. And I'm very happy to, I think there are a number of people, NADA, Wiltshire Community Energy, Salisbury Community Energy, and as well as Zero Chippenham, who've got experience, and maybe we can set up some form of peer mentoring scheme within Wiltshire to help organisations that are just starting. So just a couple of suggestions. I'll put my email address in the chat as well.
That's a great suggestion, Peter. Yeah. I think that's. Hopefully, again, people can have a look again at the recording, and just to kind of pick up some of the points that maybe glossed over, or whatever, because there's so much information, and it is complex. It is complex. So how do we want to, Julian and Bill? Do we want to host that, or is that?
It goes on the website. The recording will go on the website.
Yeah.
So
but hosting what Peter suggested, maybe. Do we want to host that, or is that?
I think we need to produce. Listening to everything that's been said. Julian came in the room, listening to everything that's been said tonight. I think there are a number of key issues maybe we need to talk in a very small group about, how to push that back out to the people who are in the meeting and beyond. So I don't think we can necessarily summarize everything at this minute, but I do think we need to step through all the things we've heard and try and make if you like, a little schedule, even if that goes on the website as well as an initial guide. But I love Pete's offer to run a course, a discussion. I would think that'd be face to face in a room somewhere, because you'll get much more interaction. But I think that's a really good idea for nascent groups to come to start getting a feel for, and meet other people who are trying to get a feel for what's going on. So I think WCA could help a lot in that.
So just as a parting thing then, how do people want to, who have an interest in that, how do they let us know they want to be part of that when we get something organized?
Yeah.
Go on, Julian.
I was going to say, could I suggest that if people want to be involved, if you could either put your email in the chat if you don't mind sharing it, or you can send it directly to WCA if you don't want to share it with everyone, or send it to contact@Wiltshire Climate Alliance and say you'd like to join the community energy group. We can set up an email group for people to keep in touch, or it could be a WhatsApp group if you want to, but maybe an email group. It might be better for this, but what you like. And yeah, we can set that up. But I'm concerned that maybe one or two people here we haven't got emails for, so please make sure we have if you want to be in the loop.
And we will circulate back out, I hope, on all those emails, the chat anyway, if you haven't picked it up, because you need to click on the chat to get hold of it if you don't already know. Don't forget to do that if you want to grab it.
Well, thank you everyone for your patience, for a bit of a bumpy start.
Yeah, sorry about that bump in the road.
But I just really want to thank very much Peter, Sophie and Nick, and also Maggie for your really helpful information and experience, sharing that, and generosity actually of sharing that with us. The great thing is, to me, is that this is not rocket science. It's been done many times in many places. Everyone's going to be a bit unique, but there's a lot we can learn from what's gone on. So, just to make life a lot easier, because this is a necessary thing. And Bill,
can I make one ad hoc point? A couple of three things in the chat, plus just a recent discussion with Julian talking about ground source heat pump networks. And I wonder whether it would be worth setting up a session like this specifically about ground source heat pump networks, because they're almost, in a country environment, they're almost the thing we should be doing everywhere. But I'm just saying, maybe we run another workshop, another evening like this, because we obviously have Beanland, who's been with us forever. And if we could get Kenzo and others along to talk about it as well, actually would give a lot of information to potential groups who might be interested.
Well, we could do that as run as another session through an energy group, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Well, it's just gone over 9. So thanks for bearing with us, and hope to see you all again soon. But I hope it's been food for thought, and that really sparked your enthusiasm for engaging with community energy in one form or another. Thanks all again.